are getting the show on the road for today's live stream Ask Me Anything event. We're kind of getting back onto a regular Tuesday schedule, which I think is probably a little bit easier for people to be able to log in and watch. And I am starting this just a few minutes early here, so hopefully that'll help people be able to feel like they can log on, and also lets me kind of take care of some of my random technical problems that could be happening here and there. So that way it gives me a chance to kind of get ahead of that. Real quick, we had a lot of questions that already were in the queue before we got started, so I'll just give a little bit of a brief outline for those who haven't done this before, and just for my regular viewers, hopefully this is just a quick review. But if you're going to ask a question, just try to say @WeTheGoverned. It just makes it a little bit easier for me to pull up the questions and see them. There's a lot of chatter that tends to go on between different commenters back and forth, which is fine, it's great, but it's a little bit easier for me to pull out the questions. And especially as I get further along into the evening, a lot of times I get so many questions in that I can't keep up with them. So I'm really trying to skip and hit questions as they're being sent over to me. So hopefully that'll be helpful. And with that, a couple other little things. I've tried to stay on top of some of this a little bit. I did 2 videos today, which will launch pretty quickly, and one of them is related directly to what a lot of the first comments in here are involving, which is just with Biden dropping out of the race over the weekend, just my perspective on how that may or may not have an impact on Washington state elections. So based on your questions coming in, some of the initial questions in here, and the one I think I have right there, that'll probably be some kind of a topic that we discover, and I have a video that I did about it too, so I'm kind of getting ahead of myself a little bit on my own video. The other thing that I anticipate putting up is I have a document, or I should say I have a video that I've produced about Thurston County and what it appears to be forging public records. And this is not a good thing, but I want to talk about how it was discovered, what it means, why it was done, and how to catch your local government if they're doing something similar where you live. Of course, I live in Thurston County, so it's kind of a big deal for me to see that. And also, I want to point out how one person can indeed make quite a bit of a difference in your local community. And I thought the example of John Pettit in Thurston County catching this, and then there may be more, but this I only really talked about one of the resolutions being forged, and I'm happy to talk about that a little bit here and what that actually means. So again, if you have a question, drop it in the comment section. There's a ton of them popping up here, so I'm going to jump right into a couple of these, and we'll just see as we go along with the program. It's Ask Me Anything, and no guarantees that I'm going to have an answer, but I will do my best. So the first question that I've had up here on the screen for a bit is from Gory Burke. You dropped this in actually before we even got the live stream going here today, which is, "Hi Glenn, how does Joe Biden dropping out of the presidential race affect the general election in November since our primary has come and passed?" And let me kind of get into that a little bit more detail. Now, what I believe you're actually asking there is that the presidential primary, which was in March earlier this year, that's already come and passed. That's true, but our Washington state primary, which has pretty much everybody else on it except for the president's, the race for president, that's actually in play right now. I mean, August 6th is the actual election day, but most people, if you're in Washington state, you've already received your ballots, and you might have already filled them out and dropped them off, as I did recently. So the real question on Biden dropping out has more to do with, I actually think that impact is going to be more significant, especially as the Democrats, depend on how they sort out who they're, maybe it is Kamala Harris, maybe they pull a fast one and it's somebody else, but it really is going to have more of an impact in the November election, in my opinion. However, one of the things that we'll be able to look at in August, so on August 6th, it'll take them a couple weeks to get all the ballots collated, collected, and counted, but I'm anticipating that the big thing that we're going to be looking at is going to be voter turnout, and particularly voter turnout in non-hardcore metro areas. So I would say that people who hate Trump are most concentrated in places like Seattle and Issaquah and Kirkland and maybe downtown Everett, downtown Vancouver, downtown Olympia, places like that, downtown Spokane probably. So you get a lot of, I can't see people like that who just hate Trump in general being affected one way or the other for whoever's going to be on the Democrat ballot. But I do think you're going to, as you get away from kind of mouth foaming, kind of crazy, obsessive, focused people like that, and you get into the more rural districts that in Washington state have a potential to swing a little bit differently, where a Republican or a Democrat could win the race. In those districts, I suspect that looking at turnout in August is going to be a better pre-indicator of the impact that the Biden dropping out transition process that's going on right now. I think that's going to be a more clear impact of where those potential impacts could be in Washington state. Since Washington state's not considered a battleground state by pretty much anybody, neither the Republican Party nor the Democrat Party generally view Washington as a battleground for the presidential race. Sometimes we're battleground, certainly in different congressional districts. We've got 2 Republicans and 8 Democrats in the congressional delegation right now. That's not really an accurate reflection of the population in our state, which is much closer to 45-55 on average, with some recent voting. I would anticipate that the 3rd congressional district, which is where I live, I'm kind of the very north part of that 3rd congressional district, Southwest Washington, which has recently historically been Republican, that's definitely considered one of the more battleground Republican districts. Everybody knows it. The Democrat Party is going to put a lot of money in there to retain that seat if they can keep it, and the Republicans are, have a good shot. I mean, just looking at surveys of probably pulling it off in that district. Where I think the impact at the top of the ticket on the Democrat side could have an impact is more out on the peninsula in the 6th congressional district. Generally, that district that encompasses most of the peninsula and just a little part of Tacoma. So you got population centers in Port Townsend, parts of Tacoma, kind of Bremerton area, and it also goes up all the way around to Port Angeles and Sequim at the top. And Drew McGeown is the Republican candidate there, and he's, because of our top 2 primary system, he's going to be the candidate who comes through most likely as the Republican lead person in that congressional race. The Democrats have a kind of a knockdown, drag-out battle between Hillary Franz, who is current public lands commissioner, who twice has kind of put her hat in the ring for governor and bailed out. And now she jumped over to decide to run in the 6th congressional district, and she's running against Emily Randall out of the 26th, which was a surprise. And Emily is, despite being an odd duck and a strange candidate for the Democrat side, an extreme leftist in a lot of ways, Hillary Franz, who should be able to have tons of money and tons of support and run a pretty organized campaign, I mean, she's won statewide, is just floundering this race in the 6th congressional district, surprisingly so. So it may end up being Drew McGeown versus Emily Randall. Drew McGeown it's still considered a plus D congressional district, but it's not by a huge amount. And so if there's a voter turnout problem for the left in November, that's a congressional district, I think, that it's pretty reasonable to see a different outcome in it. If you had a really well-funded Republican campaign in the 10th congressional district, which encompasses Fort Lewis and Pierce County right there, as well as Thurston County and Olympia, I actually think that a good, an aggressive candidate in the 10th district could do fairly well for the Republicans. But you really need a well-funded candidate, and right now we don't have a well-funded candidate in that race against Marilyn Strickland, so I'm not... we'll see what happens in the primary numbers, but something would have to be, if it shows that district in play right now, that's an earthquake across the system. So anyway, the bigger thing that I talked about, I think, in analyzing the elections in Washington state is that, well, I think that the top ticket impact on the Democrat side could have some down ticket sort of impact. I think that's a little bit less likely than the impact that you're going to see on a positive side for more conservative, liberty-oriented people voting. It will be the initiatives. The initiatives, there's 4 of them. Vote yes, pay less is not a difficult campaign slogan. The Let's Go Washington people have been pushing those initiatives. They all cut your cost of living if you vote yes for them. Reversing any kind of attempt to ban natural gas, repealing Inslee's ridiculous Climate Commitment Act scam that just simply increases the cost of taxes, letting people have the option to opt out of the long-term care payroll tax scam, which even the supporters of it recognize that if given the option, most people will opt out of it because they know it's a bad deal and it's a big scam. And then repealing the capital gains tax, which is widely recognized as the backdoor and admitted by the Democrat supporters as their way of bringing income tax into Washington state. All these things are on the ballot, and even though the AG and everybody else is going to try to skew things with impact statements and multi-million-dollar billionaire-funded campaigns, they're generally positive, and I suspect that there's a pretty good chance that we're going to see that turnout, because those are only in November, and they're actually ahead of the president's race. I think a lot of otherwise apathetic voters may come out and vote, and I think it's going to adjust and affect the turnout model more than what happens at the national level. I might be wrong. We'll see what the primary results coming out here in August tell us, but that's what I think. And so my video that I did today, I'll go into more detail about that a little bit later. Here's a question also by Gory Burke as well. Shouldn't the Biden-Harris ticket be pulled and the next highest vote Democrat ticket go on the November ballot in place of Biden-Harris? Well, that would be true if you assumed that the national Democrat primary mattered, but it doesn't. That's just a kabuki theater pretense. Obviously, if the polling doesn't look good, I guess the Democrat Party can go ahead and poll their lead candidate, regardless of what people voted for in the primary election, which is interesting because it opens up a strange little scenario that I don't think we've seen in a long time. I don't think we've ever seen it in Washington state. It's certainly not in my lifetime, which is, the lead person who's supposed to be the presidential candidate's gone now, supposedly. Now, Kamala Harris, I think, trying to jump in as the lead, as the replacement lead for the amazing job she did as VP, sort of makes sense, I think, that the Democrats would go down that road. But regardless, now you're going to have a different ballot put together. Under Washington state law, I believe the Secretary of State says that August 22nd is kind of the drop-dead date. You have to have it finalized by then. Now, political parties get to choose who their candidates are by whatever process they've chosen them. And the Democrats, there's no rules on that side. They clearly just, the rules get thrown out when they're convenient. So going into this, going into this Democrat Party convention, I think the last day of the convention is on the 22nd. And the convention is where the nomination event officially occurs, and they have to send over the nomination data to the Secretary of State. That's going to happen pretty quick. But it doesn't matter what their own rules are. They'll suspend their own rules, whatever they might be, in the eternal quest for power. And so provided that they comply with state laws. And I don't think Washington's one of the harder states to comply with. There's some other states where it'll be a little bit more difficult. We probably won't be the hardest one there. Nick, hello. Hi, Glenn, got my ballot. Can you share your opinion about candidates? Never heard anything about judges. Feels like they're shadows on the ballot. Can you bring some light on them? Thank you. Well, the only judge that everybody's essentially, the only judge position I think that everybody's actually voting on in the primary is the Supreme Court race that's going on right now. And in that race, I'm a fan of Judge Larson. I think he's a good option for us. It would be amazing to get somebody at the Supreme Court. Be the first time in a number of years that we've had a judge there who cares about the Constitution and believes that it's real and that it matters and that it has to apply to everybody. Generally, the history of the state Supreme Court lately, since Jim Johnson was off, and certainly since both Johnson and Sanders were there a while ago, is that the Constitution is interpreted very aggressively only to support preferred political categories of people, and then it's interpreted completely differently for the categories of people that from a political perspective, that the Supreme Court justices don't support. this is a problem. It's produced some really terrible results in the court system lately. And even getting one person in there who's got the ability to understand that the Constitution's real and that it matters and applies equally to all would be quite a change. And I think Judge Larson would be a good pick there. The other races that are a little bit harder to see sometimes is the OSPI race, the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, because there's no partisan affiliation in that race either. And again, you've got kind of this, it's a four-way race, but really it's a three-way race. Dave Olson is from the Peninsula School District, he's a school board member out there, is going to be more clearly aligned with conservative merit-based education approaches. So he would be, and I believe the Republicans kind of endorsed him as well, that he stands out from that perspective. He's also likely to come to the primary. The big question there is the battle between Reichel and Saras, because they're essentially, Reichel's the incumbent OSPI director and Saras is the challenger. And Saras is well-funded. He's got a big support network, a lot of them from out of state. He is, I think, really his big support is coming from parents who care about merit, but they're more liberal-leaning folk out of the kind of eastern King County side of things. Some of the money, just looking at some of the donations to him, I believe that's kind of his angle, where he's trying to play up this role. I mean, there's no doubt Reichel's been the best thing for homeschooling in Washington State history. Between Reichel and Governor Inslee, the homeschool and private school systems couldn't have asked for a better combination to drive kids out of the public school system and into private and homeschooling options. 41,000 families left the system because of them. And Reichel is so incompetent and so egregious in that position and self-destructive that the last thing he cares about is improving student learning in any measurable way. So the complete and total just wrecking ball to public education that Reichel's become is so bad that he's generated a viable alternative in Saras, who's probably trying to run a more of a middle-of-the-road campaign. I'm not at all confident that Saras is that middle-of-the-road, but he's been aggressively attacking Reichel, and that's a legitimate fight. So whichever of them come out, probably from a Machiavellian sort of look in that particular race, if Reichel came out barely winning by one and Olson came through pretty solidly, that would probably be the best potential option for getting a replacement in the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, because I think Olson would have a good chance of beating Reichel. I think if Saras comes out against Olson, I think it's a little bit tougher race, both from a fundraising and networking standpoint. Now, Reichel always has the WEA funds, which are unlimited, and unlike a lot of the teachers union seems to enjoy the destruction of public education as part of their experience. Provided they get enough cash for themselves, they don't really seem to care. So this is where the dynamic seems to be playing in that race. And that's one of the races that's very difficult to pay attention to if you're not familiar with the partisan side. If you are living in a box and you're somehow watching my channel still and you don't know anything about the governor's race, I have done a couple of videos outlining some of the leading positions going forward as to who they are. The primary, obviously people are already voting in the primary, and the primary is going to winnow down those 28 candidates down to 2. Most polling and surveys, to whatever degree they're accurate, and again, it's hard to know. I don't trust surveys any more than I'm sure many of you do, and I'm not asking you to trust surveys or believe them. I'm just saying that it doesn't matter who's done the survey or which group sponsored it and who behind the scenes is running surveys, and you're not hearing about those results because they're not being publicized. Generally, all the surveys with varying degrees of analysis are predicting that the two people most likely to come out of the governor's race will be Bob Ferguson on the Democrat side, and he's just horrible in every measurable way, and Dave Reichert on the Republican side, most likely. Now, Semi Bird is probably going to be in third position, I would guess, as another Republican. and I know there's a bitter feud between the two of them. But just the surveys are showing this, and to some extent, it's not too much of a surprise. Again, you need money to market yourself, and if you don't have that money, then marketing yourself is very difficult. So by itself, that alone has put Byrd in a difficult position there, simply because he doesn't have the resources to really reach out and touch people. And frankly, right now, it's too late anyway. The ballot's already out, so the cake is baked, and now you just have to see what the results are. Somebody who had more resources and produced an even smaller impact was in the other Democrat, Mark Mullet, running from the 5th legislative district as a senator. He was one of the last Democrats I've talked about before who actually believes math is real in the state Senate, and who was semi-sane. And so Inslee had tried to take him out of office a while ago. So he's running, and he was attacking Ferguson. I think he waited way too late. He should have been attacking Ferguson a lot sooner, but in the end, he did a really good job attacking Ferguson. But I doubt he's going to survive. I mean, it'll be stunning if he can get more than 5% of the vote. But he spent over $1.3 million, I think, which is twice what Semi Byrd has in the kitty at the PDC. And it doesn't seem to have made much of an impact in Mark Mullet's race. You have a couple other races there. In the insurance commissioner race, I believe there's more than one Republican running, but Phil Fortunato, who's a state senator out of the 31st legislative district, which is kind of the Auburn area, he seems to be, that race, a lot of observers are saying that it's most likely going to be Cooterer on the Democrat side, who'd be terrible in that position, facing off against Fortunato. And the truth is, the funny thing about the way the two of them campaign, Fortunato's obviously a better choice, but if they could stop talking about themselves and start talking about the consumer advocacy side, most people are really upset with the insurance in Washington State, and they're just the radical increase in insurance rates here. Not 100% of that is caused by the insurance commissioner's office, but under Mike Kreidler, the current incumbent fossilized insurance commissioner, who's not been, he's kind of been pulling a Biden for the last 6 years. Staff runs the show. It's been run poorly in that office, and so they've done absolutely nothing to reduce the cost of insurance for regular people out there, and I think you could really turn that into a consumer-friendly operation that also allows it to become a lot cheaper option than it currently is in Washington State. So if Phil is able to kind of focus on that, I think he could really set himself apart. But both Cooterer and Phil tend to tell a lot of funny stories, and they talk about themselves, but they aren't really talking about as much on the impact they can make as a more pro-consumer friendly side of things. So that seems like that'd be an interesting direction. The state treasurer, state auditors, you have one Republican, one Democrat. People are going to vote partisan focus. Those races are worth noting in the primary just to see what the Republican percentages are. But there won't be any surprises in the sense of the fact that both of the people on the ballot are going to be in the general. I would say the race for Attorney General is interesting because obviously Pete Serrano is the only sane person in that race. And the battle between Nick Brown and Moncadingra, or the two Democrats, Moncadingra has gone full crazy mode, and Nick Brown is trying to run this sort of less dramatic, more lazy campaign. And Pete Serrano's got an opportunity to come out of the Attorney General's race, I hope, in a pretty good position. Lieutenant governor's race has two very low-funded Republican candidates running against a very well-funded incumbent, and then some other people in the race. It's Dan Matthews and Bob Hagelin who are running as Republicans there, but neither of them have much in the way of funding for their races. So I don't know. I mean, it's anybody's guess as to who comes out as one of the Republicans I would anticipate coming out of that primary. A number of people in that race, but that's what I would kind of expect to see there. Public Lands Commissioner. So that's the other one that's kind of a free for all. I suspect Up the Grove on the Democrat side is the crazy enviro. He was able to kind of squeeze out the Saldana in that race a little bit. I mean, her name's still on the ballot, but he was able to kind of take away a lot of her endorsements by attacking even more into the crazy left lane than he already was. And so there's a lot of consolidation on the Democrat side. On the Republican side, there's essentially a division between two. You have Jamie Herrera Butler, a former congresswoman from the 3rd Congressional District, who's done a really good job fundraising and seemed to hit the ground running pretty well in the beginning. And then you have Sue Peterson, who's run for office before, and has a background in forestry, but doesn't have the same kind of funding resources or campaign experience that Herrera Butler has, although Sue Peterson did get the Republican Party endorsement at a national level. And so, but I would, most people are believing that Jamie Herrera Butler probably comes out of the primary, all things being equal, to basically face off with Upgrove. Now, there's a wild card in the race, which is Van de Weg, and he's a Democrat from the 24th legislative district, which is up in the peninsula. And I listened to him recently on a Farm Bureau endorsement hearing, and he's presenting himself as the sane Democrat. So there's a little bit of fight between him and Upgrove, essentially, where on the Democrat side of the Public Lands Commissioner race, where Van de Weg's going to say, listen, I'm the only Democrat in the race that doesn't want to let the forest burn and pretend that that logging is evil and all these other things. And Upgrove, who's just going to go full green New Deal fight. And so between these two guys, they're the heart, that there's a battle there. If for some reason Van de Weg's able to pull it off on the Democrat side and come out as the Democrat chosen person versus either Republican in the general, the public lands will be in better hands no matter what after that face-off, because even Van de Weg as a Democrat would actually probably be a lot more sane than Upgrove. So it's just an interesting dynamic going on there. Off the top of my head, I can't think of anything else. Ask me more questions if I missed something here. Here's this is not a question, but I'll answer it anyway. Say something positive and constructive about Kamala's political history. Listen, she doesn't have a lot of political history. She's a crazy leftist. She's one of the weirdest people I've ever seen in public. Like, I don't know if you remember, but she did this weird she did this weird like kabuki theater setup for some event a couple years ago where they brought in these token actors, child actors, and set them up, pretended she spoke to them, but it was the weirdest, like clearly she's never been around kids before. So the way she talked to them was so strange and bizarre. And she repeatedly does this. It's surprising to me that again, compared to Biden, anything above a marshmallow is probably more preferable to Obama or to Biden. Sorry, Freudian slip there. So Kamala Harris is coming out of this mix. Again, it does appear to me that at least on the Democrat side, their candidates don't matter anyway. They just plan to run the show with their bureaucrats and their staff, and the candidates are just kind of a fake facade of whatever's going to be represented there, which is pretty interesting. Philip Olds, great question here, and it's an interesting one because it's one that we've asked before. Please explain to me what benefits does a citizen have over a non-citizen? Great question, because it's a direct reflection on some of the public policy lately, where in theory, it looks like the distinction between the advantages that being a citizen versus a non-citizen, the benefits there are fading away. So in theory, being a citizen of America, you're protected of the constitutional rights, but we essentially give those same rights to people whether they're citizens or not when they're here. Then the next question is, if you're a citizen, you're allowed to vote and determine who our political leaders are, but the Democrats, of course, are trying to take that away and give non-citizens the right to vote. Theoretically, they can't yet, but that's been a pressure point from the left for a while. Then there's the question of benefits, Social Security, and all this stuff, but again, the Democrats have been eroding that benefit as well. So the distinction between the benefits of a citizen and non-citizen are certainly narrowing quite a bit. And this is one of the reasons why you have a lot of arguments driving, I think, a more populist approach and a more realistic approach, hopefully, to a more pro-national sort of approach to immigration, just generally. It's because of that closing gap that you've identified in that question there. Here's a question, Thunderstriker. Can Kamala just take over the candidacy? Isn't a democratic process needed for that? You're right. I mean, if the Democratic Party actually believed in the democratic process, then Kamala would have to go through some kind of an approval process, but that time has passed. So essentially, the Democrat Party is actually in a position where it wants to be, I think, which is that they get a chance to have political insiders cut out those annoying Democrat voters who support people like Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders or anybody else that's not inside the ruling cabal. And this lets the ruling cabal pick who their candidates are. Now, by the way, this is how political parties used to do things. They would at least pick people to run them, sometimes in primaries, but they had a process, both parties, where smoke-filled rooms were making decisions about who some of these people could be running for office. And so we're kind of getting back to that. It's like a back to the future kind of thing. We're going back to ancient history and going back to before you even had primaries. That's what the Democrats have done here, which is unusual. We are living in unusual times when it comes to this stuff. Another question from Thunderstriker here. I bet Biden wouldn't have stepped down if the assassination had been successful. Would he, though? Thoughts? I tend to agree with that. I don't think he would have stepped down. I do think that he would have. They would have just kept. It's weekend at Bernie's, right? They would have found some way to pretend he was alive, just like they've been pretending that he was actually running the country for the last few years. So it's kind of a big deal what we're seeing here. Listen, this is very unprecedented sort of situation that we find ourselves in politically. It's shocking. And in recent times, we haven't seen anything like this. So it's kind of an interesting situation. Here's a question here. Suzette, good question. Where's the chicken tuna money sent to dead people go when it's returned to the state? Technically, it sits in this fund that, it's a good question, that's managed by the Department of Revenue in Washington State. And it sits there in the name of the dead person, typically. If you're sophisticated enough to still have, depending on how far back they died, if you're the inheritor of their estate, there's actually a process you can go through to get the monies. Again, these aren't huge checks, but it's $120 or $50 or something that's sitting there. You could go through that process if you were a recipient of the beneficiary of their will, for example, and you could prove that they were dead. You'd be able to get that as an asset. Just so you know, it's kind of a weird thing. Let's see. David Amoni, regarding the Chevron defense case, is there something in the state constitution that could be used to fight the growth of state government? Well, yes and no. I mean, not related to the Chevron defense, because that was essentially that recent case. Gosh, I'm slipping on what it was, but from a few weeks ago. For those of us who care about the abuse of the administrative state, and I don't know why I'm not remembering the name of this case right now, but having the Chevron defense, which was basically the Supreme Court deciding that when in doubt, the justices should presume that the government's right, that the bureaucrats are right. So if there's any gray area, always err on their favor. And that great deference to the administrative state led to a cascade of horrible legal decisions and theories that have really eroded freedom and liberty across the spectrum of human activity in America. So to roll back that decision, which was widely criticized over time, in particular by those of us who care about liberty and freedom, and by a lot of legal scholars over the last several decades, to see that finally go down as an acceptable thing to reference in fights that the bureaucrats have with people and how they're destroying the rights and freedoms of people, it's a big deal. Our state constitution is not as, I mean, in theory, if you read it and interpret it the way that it's written, which our Supreme Court doesn't in this state, you would already see that we have individual rights protected very well. In fact, I would say that in many ways our state Supreme Court, our state Constitution's written, our Washington State Supreme Constitution is written way better than the federal Constitution in a lot of ways. Gun rights, I think some of the free speech issues, all these, I think some ways it's written quite a bit better, but it still has to be kind of interpreted about that. Michelle Andrews, how is Cody Hart's case against Ferguson going? To my knowledge, it's going nowhere. But if anybody actually has some evidence that it's going somewhere, I'd like to know. And who knows? We'll see. Andrea K., have you seen the childish cartoon put out by the Secretary of State showing how the mail-in voting process works? They claim the ballot's journey is safe and secure. What a joke. Well, I have not seen it, but it doesn't surprise me. And here's the part of it is there's a certain arrogance associated with the people who are in political power. And the arrogance is oftentimes comes out in the paternalistic kind of talking down attitude that they have to the general public, just presuming that we're all stupid, ignorant, and dumb rubes and peasants out here, serfs barely able to keep care of ourselves, and that only the smart people in government can help us. And so they're going to produce, ballots like that. The safe and secure thing is ridiculous. And here's the thing. What they should be saying is that, listen, if you've had experience with your mail being stolen, you've had packages that never showed up to you. My mom just had this happen recently where somebody sent the package to somebody else and they aren't sure where it went, never to be seen again. If you've had experience where your mail ends up in the ditch or never gets to you or something else, then perhaps you might want to take your ballot and drive it in and drop it off the auditor's office. Nothing prevents you from doing that. That's what I do. And dropping it off the auditor's office, you cut a lot of middlemen, a lot of potential failure points for your ballot, because it's not a safe and secure process necessarily. Majority of the ballots may end up getting there, but several of them get lost along the way. And if you've talked to as many postal workers as I have, you will be significantly disturbed by the direction that forget about just voting, but just the mail system in general. So, let's see. Alex Brown, got my ballot yesterday. Noticed the party box on the outside of the envelope wasn't there. Was that for a specific election, or did they throw that in the bin? That was very specific to the presidential primary only. I've done a video about this in the past, but just to quickly explain, when you have a presidential primary, they want Democrats voting in the one, and they want Republicans voting in the other, and third-party people can randomly pick which one you want to be associated with or sit that one out. But in theory, the reason why they have the partisan affiliation on the outside is so they can sort it. They're counting the Democrat votes on one side and the Republican votes on the other. That's why they do that. They do that only for the presidential primary every 4 years, no other time. It is only that race in Washington State that when you're doing a data assessment of whether a voter is Republican or Democrat, it's the only way that you get a sense of people that you're going to be voting Republican because you're participating in the Republican primary, and that does show up, or you're participating in the Democrat primary, and that's going to determine party affiliation. So in theory, that determines whether you get mail or fundraising letters. I just got an text message from the Democrat Party chair of Washington State, who wants me to send money to Act Blue and support Kamala Harris. I thought that was funny. So anyway, that kind of stuff is going on. Thunderstriker, people were saying that Kamala does poorly in the Southwest states, New Mexico, Nevada, Arizona. Thoughts? Well, I think she does poorly in most places. It seems to me, just judging from, you're trying to see behind the scenes as best you can. She's had unique in that position, as far as I can tell. She's had massive turnover of staff who have bailed out on her campaign and had nothing but bad things to say about her extensively, like way more than you would normally see with a politician, even at that level. That doesn't bode well to me on how she's going to be treating the staff that are jumping in to try to prop her up for this race. Also, remember when she did run for president, and she put her name in the hat just like everybody else 4 years ago now. She did so poorly she couldn't even get to 1%. So it was, it was a complete disaster, just like Jay Inslee. When you can't do that, and yet you're chosen as the primary optimal person to run for president, it's not really a good indication. It really doesn't support how they'll do, but we'll see what happens. Does a primary election committee or determine what name is printed on the ballot? If a Democrat quits, does that a new candidate is a write-in on the general election ballot? So this won't be a write-in type situation. You'll always have the option to write in. I don't encourage you to do that because you will have some distinct differences to vote for in this race. But normally the primary election for the presidential race is what determines who's going to be on the presidential ballot in November. And the presidential primary, the partisan presidential primary, is run very separate and unique. It's in March. The primary that we're in right now, if you live in Washington State, you've got these ballots probably already. That is for everything else. That's a top 2 jungle primary for governor, lieutenant governor, AG, all the legislative seats, anybody running for Senate, all the congressional seats, the federal Senate seat. I didn't talk about the federal Senate seat earlier, but anyway, so all of those races are essentially and all the way down to county commissioner in some cases. That's what's actually on the primary here in August. And you're sorting out who the top 2 are going to be. So Supreme Court Justice, it's all coming through that. So are you familiar with Prop 5 in Clark County? If so, what are your thoughts? Obviously, I want good EMT services, but I wonder how wise they are using the money that they have. Well, this is great. I'm assuming Prop 5 is an EMT proposal. I haven't looked at that one very specifically. I've looked at many of these in the past. Usually, depending on the nature of the EMT proposal, they've been trying to divide up and have multiple taxing entities apply to things like 911 call center, communication stuff. They're trying, because these are generally things people are positive about. Generally, people support a good EMT services. It's true. So it's generally easier to run those kind of tax proposals on the ballot. People are not supportive of financing an incompetent and disastrous central planning department, for example, which is why you'll never see a tax proposal for them. Or you'll never see a tax proposal for, please give us more money because the bureaucrats need bigger salaries. They always have to portray it as something else, even if that's the true outcome. So, make sure you know for sure who's involved in it, what the studies are. Sometimes these are necessary, but lately a lot of them have been out of control. So that's where we go. Hawk fan for life, 88. What are your thoughts on the state Supreme Court race? I did mention this earlier, but Judge Larson's a good choice in the Supreme Court race, and nobody else running is. So if you care about freedom, liberty, and a true understanding of the state constitution. Happy to see you from Adams County. Okay, here's a funny question. Do you think Biden will have to pardon himself before he steps down unless he has assurances from Kamala that she'll do it? Good question. I mean, it's not a good look usually for a president to pardon themselves. For instance, the governor of Washington State can do that too if they want to. It's usually not a good look if they do that. But so probably, my guess is that judging from Biden's history, he held out for the best deal he could get. Usually that involves money, jobs, and other things for the whole family. So I'm sure that he was holding out for something like that. I think Peter Schweitzer, when he talks about it, because he studied the Bidens for a long time, I think he's accurate in that assessment. The family probably got together, figured, okay, the writing's on the wall. We're doomed. They're going to try pulling a fast one with the 25th Amendment on us, and we're going to crash and burn here. So let's hold this out as long as we can and get the best payoff for the whole family, and I'm sure that includes pardons and something like that. So that's what I'm sure is going on there. Daniel Morrison, good question. Could you do a video for those of us that are new to politics, a Politics for Dummies kind of format? I could, but be more specific, because there's a lot of different kind of segments in that, and so if you have some suggestions, if you could email them to me at glenn@wethegoverned, I'd consider that as far as a video series and maybe put something like that together. I'd be happy to help. That's a great suggestion. Thank you for bringing that up. Ben Garrett, what should Reichert bring up in a debate against Bob Ferguson to give him the best shot at winning and exposing Bobby's corruption? Well, the one thing I want to point out is that despite the fact that on a national stage, right, the recent presidential debate was probably one of the most consequential debates in modern history for a president, because clearly Biden was exposed for being kind of a brain dead, decrepit guy suffering from some diseases, and probably hasn't been running anything the government since he's been there. And that exposed him to such a wide audience, and it affected the polls enough that clearly the total direction of the race changes. That is not the way most debates happen. They're rarely going to have that kind of impact. You can go back and look at the debates. Inslee has lost every debate he's ever had. plenty of people on the Republican side running for office have done really well in these debates in our state, and it rarely translates into a significant amount of information that the regular public gets. Generally, the traditional media ignores the failures of the Democrat, and they cover up for those failures or try to write them off or ignore them, so they don't get widely publicized. So even if you do a really good job in the debate, it just doesn't matter. And in this case, if I was Reichert, though, I was debating Ferguson, I'd be bringing up the fact that no attorney general in the history of the state of Washington has done more to ensure that violent crime and crime in general is more widespread today than it ever was at any other time before Ferguson took that position. He did anything and everything he could to look the other way and just let violence spread. He did nothing to try to stop it. No, it's so funny he's pretending to be law and order right now. I think they've done surveys to show that he's weak in this area. It is absurd. I mean, this guy is the furthest thing from law and order anybody's ever seen in this office. So if I was Riker, that just happens to be in his wheelhouse too, since he's a former sheriff of King County, I would be focused on that, and I think that would make an impact. Okay, Daniel, you want me to do those videos on Washington? I could definitely do that. Yeah, we just need to get more details about it. Yep, I talked about Phil Fortunato for insurance commissioner earlier, and I'm mainly talking about just in the reference that he is the one most likely to come through by all studies and inside sort of analysis of that particular race. Ben Garrett, honestly, I don't understand why anyone would want to vote for Bob Ferguson unless you're a political insider or work for government or just brainwashed. Am I wrong? That's what would be our perspective. But keep in mind, Bob Ferguson is going to get a partisan vote, and it wouldn't matter who is holding that position. Now, that's true on both sides of the political spectrum when if you don't know, if you lean Republican and you don't know who the candidates are, but there's a Republican and a Democrat there, you're almost always going to vote for the person who aligns with your political party. So keep in mind, there's a decent chunk of people that are just always going to vote for him because of that. A lot of them, there's a certain sliver of voters on the left side of the equation too that just flat out hate you, hate me, hate everything to do with any conservatives in Washington state. And so their rabid kind of nastiness is always going to drive a certain element of hate vote, basically, that's going to support Ferguson. The political insiders who profit from his corruption or his kickback schemes or whatever he's going to do once he's in government, some of which he's already participated in, that's not a huge number of people. They are influential. And so buying your votes the way Ferguson's approached it's probably going to make some impact. But he isn't an inspiring candidate. He's going to have to spend a lot of money to try to convince people he's an inspiring candidate. And it does create an opportunity for presumably Reichert, but whoever's faced off against Ferguson, it does create an opportunity for them to prevail. Jason, hey, Glenn, hope you're well. Does the figureheads department remind you of the Soviet Union sending the premier to the beach house to learn on the radio that they've resigned? Yeah, I mean, I think this whole thing with Biden is amazing. I mean, the Russians and the Chinese have just got to be laughing and watching America and saying, okay, that's how we need to do things. Because no sane person can possibly imagine that Biden's in charge of anything right now. And the big question, it's a legitimate one, is who exactly is running our government? What actually happens if we're under attack? I mean, I think we're very vulnerable right now to a genuine bad actor because no one knows who's in charge, and clearly Biden isn't, and that's the scary part about it. Ben, I know most people got or were supposed to get their ballots last Thursday or Friday. Mine didn't show up until yesterday, and it was just the ballot and no pamphlet. Yeah, sometimes the voters' pamphlets get sidetracked. That's true. You can get it online if you want to see it at the Secretary of State's office. They do publish a statewide voter pamphlet. Not every county is probably publishing them, but probably most of them do, and so you should be able to get those online. Sorry you didn't get one physically. It's a lot easier, I think, if you can get it that way. So, Hawk fan for life. Who's our front runner for governor? Semi versus Dave. Well, I mean, obviously we won't know until after August 6th, but my gut tells me, and I don't think I'm too wrong on this, and this is just a logical point of analysis here. probably, I would say Reichert's the more likely person to come out of the race. Now, 4 years ago, when I was looking at the Republican field at the time, and there were 5, I think, pretty legitimate, I'll say legitimate candidates running for a Republican governor candidate 4 years ago. And it was a surprise a bit that Culp came out of that scrum and that he came out ahead. But if you look back on it, it was a very small percentage. It was about 17% is what he got. And there were a number of other, Tim Eyman was in that race. I actually thought Tim, just due to name recognition, with so many people in the race, would be able to pull it off and actually get first. But I was wrong, and he was not able to come out of that scrum, and he missed it by a little ways. Josh Freed was in that race. There were some other people that had jumped in, and the Republicans got quite a bit divided up. It's fortunate that it wasn't a 2 Democrat top 2 primary, just the way it happened. So this year you only really essentially had 2 Republicans running, Semi and Reichert. And so you're not going to have that same dynamic in the primary. All these other names on the ballot are probably, I haven't heard of anybody really taking off yet. So there's even Mark Mullet, who's the only one that's been polled for a while, even though he spent over $1 million some odd, $1.2 million, something like that. He didn't move the needle at all, and it looks like he's going to get somewhere in that neighborhood of 3 to 4% if he's lucky. If he gets anywhere near 4, if he gets above 4%, that's a huge accomplishment for him. So think about that. It's as far as what you have to do to get up past that point. So we'll see what happens. I would guess, if you're betting, you'd probably say Reichert, but also the money matters, and Reichert has money in the bank, and generally Semi doesn't, and he'd be the first person, if he was sitting right next to me, to recognize that his PDCs clearly show he doesn't have money in the bank, and it's very hard to get out there and overcome that. You got to think about this from a practical standpoint if you're running for statewide office. I have a reasonable network of people that I'm not going to run for office, but let's pretend like I decide I want to run for statewide office. How many people could I actually reach? Well, maybe you could make an argument that since most of the people who subscribe to my channel live in Washington State, maybe I'm reaching out to 30,000 Washington State voters by doing a video on my channel or running a campaign, and I'm using my own channel to promote myself. That's a pretty big network of people. Maybe I know another couple thousand people, and maybe if I'm super active in my campaign, I can get out there and actually talk to another 10,000, 15,000 people, maybe in person. That's not enough. I mean, maybe I get up to 70, maybe I'm a superstar and I get up to 100,000 people that one way or another I really get in front of directly, or I meet them, or I speak in front of a group. 100,000 would be an amazing accomplishment in a statewide race in Washington. I bet nobody in the history of the state of Washington's actually had that direct of a contact personally, without a lot of money, to the people in Washington. That is not enough to come out of a primary for a statewide office anywhere, actually. If you're in a two-way race and there's only one other person, you'll come out of the primary because you're going to go to the jungle primary. But when it's a real race and you've got a lot of people and other people are spending a lot of money, you just can't get out there. It's not even a critique of somebody. You would have to have some amazing ability to somehow break through and get a massive amount of earned media, and I don't think that's very likely. I don't like how we get one per household per one person. Why is this? Oh, you're talking about the voter's guide. They only send one per household. It's just a money-saving thing for voters. You got to figure they're sending out, I think, about 4 million of those, and so it's still a lot. And we'll see how that goes. Hawk fan for life 88. Any idea on Joe Kent's chances? Absolutely love him and wish he would run for a state seat. Well, he's running again in Congress in the 3rd Congressional District. And so, it seems to indicate that he's going to do well in that race. So, again, the primary kind of cleans up who's actually in the final general race. There are other people in the race in the primary right now. And I suspect, barring an unusual setback, that it's going to be Glusenkamp, who's a Democrat incumbent right now in Congress there, and versus Joe Kent in the general. That's what I would guess. So from an August perspective, he's probably in pretty good shape. In November, we'll have to see, and August gives us a little bit of sense of what that's like. I've been reading this source online, and it says that people were asking, why did people think Joe Biden died in Las Vegas, and blame social media about it? Thoughts? I mean, listen, people are going to come up with the dumbest things, clickbait for videos that suddenly get out there. I get constantly, somebody will make a comment somewhere on X or Facebook or something, and it's based on nothing. There's no facts behind it. Nothing. It's just somebody's comment. They might not have even intended it to be a certain way, and it acts like a rumor. And I'll get questions sometimes for years about that as being a fact. And without original evidence to support it, I don't think it's good to treat those things as fact. I don't think Biden died in Las Vegas, you know. But I mean, blaming social media about it is just a lazy person's way of doing it. The censors, the people who want to control the media, they want to censor dumb ideas. They want to spread rumors so they can say, see how stupid those rumors are. This is the truth, and this is why you need to censor it. I think it's a terrible idea. Jessica Marshall, what has changed in Washington voting since 2020 that ensures free and fair elections? Well, nothing's going to ensure anything. But what has changed is that for the first time since you've been alive, there's actually a team of people, and since I've been alive, there's actually been a team of people that are not tied into a restricted party of one way or the other that are actually paying attention. Nobody, flat out nobody in Washington State, I doubt more than the number of people I have on my hand, you know, the number of fingers I have on my hand here, I doubt there was more than 5 or 6 people going into the 2020 elections in Washington State who were paying any attention at all to some of the shenanigans of elections in our state. And now we've got teams of them all over the place. And they have a much better sense now of what they're looking for. We've been doing voter roll cleanup in some counties pretty aggressively, and others a little bit more anemically, but it's put some pressure on the auditors to clean up their voter rolls or to do different things. Bad guys who are doing bad things, I think, have been exposed enough that they're a little bit more back in their shell, not doing quite as much as they were before. That's the biggest change. Unfortunately, in our state, we don't live in a state that's been that's had enough of a majority in the legislature that's interested in openly cleaning up elections and doing the right thing. So we still have a ways to go. And obviously the all mail-in voting system has a lot of weaknesses to it, a lot of downside to it, and we need to work on it. But it's not going to happen overnight. I wish it would, but it's just very difficult. Good question, though, and I enjoyed that one. Steve, I find it extremely difficult to research the individuals in voting for judges. Yeah, no kidding. Is there a resource that you could recommend for that research? Gosh, thank you for asking this question. This has always been a big concern of mine, and the answer is generally no, sort of. There's been a movement lately to set up some programs that are going to evaluate judges a bit more effectively. Historically, the Republicans or conservative side of the equation, or people who care about liberty and freedom and the true meaning of the law, originalists, whatever you want to say, short of the only thing was the Federalist Society would sometimes come out and make endorsements. As weak as they might be, there was at least some value that come out of the Federalist Society, which I would look at. But short of that, no, the party's useless generally in identifying good candidates because they're not partisan races. The parties pretty much ignore it. The Democrats don't. They pay attention. So one of the ways I do it is I look at the Progressive Voters Guide and I see who they endorse, and then I always vote for the other person because they always endorse the worst people, and that's your best way of ensuring that you get back to somebody that's probably sane. Do you think Biden dropping out hurts Trump's chances? No, I don't think so. I mean, I think if he'd stayed in, that would be the easiest race because that's the one everybody's matched up so long, and Biden's on a clear collapse right now that even his allies couldn't deny. Picking Kamala Harris seemed to be the next worst option that they chose. But, you know, I wouldn't underestimate the ability of people, if you can prop up somebody who's been brain dead for 4 years and pretend like they're actually running the country and then get the media to cover for you, they can cover for Kamala, who's maybe a weirdo and has all kinds of other problems, but they can at least make it pretend like she's, you know, in comparison to Biden, she's going to look like she's, you know, the next Messiah. So I think that's what's going on. Now, how that actually plays out moving forward, I don't know. Karen, hi Glenn, can you suggest how to approach Puget Power? Puget Power, I'm assuming you mean Puget Sound Energy, in challenging the new smart digital meters. I've been made aware of their health risks, fire risks, and privacy risks. Yeah, there used to be. I've helped people with this before, but not recently. So there's a couple. Look up websites where people have done this recently. There was a group out of North Bend that seemed like they were fairly successful. There's a couple others around the state that have been successful. I'm more concerned about the privacy risks than anything else. More than I am about the health and the fire risk, but the privacy risk for sure. And I don't like the throttling options that are essentially integrated into the smart digital meters that they're putting in today. Sorry, let's see, find the right passion. Sorry, I don't want Riker to support someone who will be bad for our Okanagan County Commissioner District. Yeah, sorry, I mean, that's those one of the candidates that tend to, when they're running for office, they generally want to avoid getting involved in other endorsements of anybody else, and they try to run their own campaign. And the reason for that is exactly the scenario you described. I don't know who you're talking about. I'd like to know more, but what happens is then because you don't like that person, then there's guilt by association. You assume that everybody else that guy supports is bad. People do this on both sides of the equation. It's not just a mainstream or rhino side of things or a conservative, libertarian. I mean, everybody will have these equations. And politics is ultimately, some of it's about personality. And so you'll have ideological divides that occur in the political process, but you also have these personal divides. And so it won't matter that you agree with somebody if you don't like them as a person, you're just not going to vote for them, you're going to dislike them. So politicians that are wise stay out of these other endorsement games and processes out there most of the time, and that's what they're trying to avoid. It's exactly the scenario you described there. Thank you for bringing that up because that's a pretty good one. Alex Brown, I don't really have much faith in the state anymore. I've been here my whole life and watched it just go downhill. I plan on sticking to the election and voting red, but we'll probably be moving after. Sorry to hear that. I don't expect people to have faith in politicians anywhere. It will not matter where you move. You will not escape what you think you're escaping. So that's all I can say. Part 2, a question. It just seems like hardly any of them have real solutions or ideas aside from mullet. Thoughts? Ben, so you're talking about the other candidates. Well, listen, I mean, to be fair, Ferguson has a lot of bad ideas. But it all revolves around just a continuing power play for himself. If he has to put you in prison, that's what he'll do. If he has to, wear rainbow skirts and dance on stage, he'll do that. He doesn't care. He's just there for power. Mullet has provided an interesting alternative on the Democrat side that's rarely seen. And again, I think it's because he's the last Democrat left in the state Senate who believes in math and other things like that. Merit maybe a little bit. But you're going to see a pretty sharp contrast, I believe, between the Republican that comes out of the primary. Again, probably Reichert. Semi-Bird's in second place, as far as I can tell right now, versus Ferguson. It's mostly going to be around law and order, role of government, and the expansion of the state. Probably those are the biggest initial divisions. Taxes will be very different. Regulation will be very different. And that's going to be where the division becomes. Jason, Seattle Times poll has Ferguson being underwater in crime and housing. Yeah, and he is. I mean, listen, Ferguson is a pro-crime guy. He's having to pretend like he's not, but I've never seen anybody in the AG's race who's done more to help promote and encourage violent crime than Ferguson. Sometimes by omission, sometimes by commission. This guy is not good for public safety. Everybody knows it. Ferguson's pretending. That's where he's trying to fight and pretend like he suddenly discovered it after 12 years in office and a lackluster time on the King County Council, but it's very hard to reverse that in just the last few months. The Republicans are pretty good at snatching victory from the jaws of, they basically have a good way of snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. That's essentially what Republicans do all the time. So if you have a pretty good candidate running a solid campaign, then the Republicans have a really good shot this cycle. We do. And what happens at the national level may come down and impact things. I think these initiatives make an impact. Do you think this will be the final nail in the coffin for Dems? No, I don't, by the way. And how do you anticipate it will impact their prospects in down-ticket races? Well, I don't think anything's ever the nail in the coffin for either political party, really. what happens is that a party has a terrible event of some kind that impacts them dramatically, and they decline, and then something will bring them back up later. That's been the history cyclically in our state and the country in general. Because the Dems control so much power and money and the bureaucracy and a lot of the unions, nothing's ever going to be the nail in the coffin for them, not unless they entirely got swept out, like in a shellacking we've never seen in modern history. You'll have to see the election to get that. But they do have the potential to lose the federal Senate. It was already a tough map for them anyway. And it looks harder for them to pick up a majority in the House, which was kind of something they were pushing for. And that's just part of a result of the chaos that's going on out there on their side, more than anything else. Trump also appears to be running a different campaign than he's run before, a little more disciplined, a little more focused. It seems like that's where that's going. So that's just my opinion. But we'll see. Dan on the run. If we submit ballots ASAP, doesn't that allow them time to adjust to make sure they still control the count? Yeah, it could be. I mean, the one thing is, if you want to wait till later, don't be late and get it in directly to the auditor's office. Hand deliver it to the auditor's office. I would not trust the mail. I know a race out in Ocean Shores where somebody put their ballot in the mail. They were voting for a good person who lost by 1 vote, and the person that supported him had stuck their ballot in the mail and never got picked up. So that can happen if you're not paying attention. I would hand deliver it, or if you can't get to the auditor's office, put it in a drop box. You still have a better chance of it actually getting there. So thoughts on Kim Wyman's mail-in ballot legacy? Well, the mail-in ballot is voting. It's been terrible. She was a fan of it. I was not. And that was an area that we definitely had a lot of disagreement on. And implementing it's been a mess. I mean, 2011, to be fair, was actually the last year that you had in-person voting anywhere, and it was Pierce County that was the last holdout in allowing for poll voting. And so it's pretty much rolling back. This is going to be a mess. I don't think Harris has all the support as claimed. Thoughts? Well, it doesn't matter whether she really does or not. They're going to hype her up and pretend that she does. Remember, the money and the influence and reality has nothing to do with it, just like pretending that Biden's not brain dead. So anyway, we'll see how it goes. C. Johnson, did you already have a video on the state Supreme Court candidates? I did not. I should have, but I didn't. I'll probably wait till after the primary results come in and then start doing a series of candidate videos, which I think are helpful, for at least from my perspective, and maybe they help other people get it. Let's see, Jason, in your opinion, are stripped lowers receivers legal in Washington State as long as they're built as pump action 22 long rifle fixed magazines? I don't know. I mean, maybe. It seems like that scenario is possible, but that doesn't sound like a super fun gun to have. What is the Everett Port expansion proposition all about? I don't know off the top of my head. That's going to be a Snohomish County focus one. But historically, port expansions are usually built around some kind of a plan the port has. Usually, in Everett, it's probably more about exports. It was at Cherry Point up in Whatcom County when there was a big battle over this, and down in Longview. Usually had more to do with exports, so I'm not sure what their plan is. Remember, Everett is a pretty big port, so expanding it is, some of our ports we're going to have to expand. Everett's not a bad one to do it. Let's see. Sorry, there's a lot of questions here. Let's see. Mail-in ballots are very convenient for many reasons. Yeah, John Jacobson, mail-in ballots are very convenient for many reasons. However, I long to go back to driving to my local polling place, greeting volunteers. We aren't alone in that, and that's not a question, but I'll just point out. The last time we did surveys on this, or I was involved in at least looking at the survey results a couple years ago, maybe 3 years ago now, it was the first time that I saw a trend in fewer people supporting mail-in voting than did a couple years before. And people like the convenience, especially uninvolved, uninterested people who rarely really participate in the political process. For them, it's a once every 4-year event, and they didn't even know there were other elections in the meantime. So I think that that's something to be aware of. The Democrats universally believe that it's basically an orthodoxy view that they have right now about mail-in voting, and so they'll never change it probably until they start losing some races, and then they'll suddenly discover that all the problems that they're fully aware of right now, but that they want to deny because they're winning. And Republicans are, of course, far less supportive of it. But the last survey I saw still showed a fairly large majority, if not, it might be slipping down a plurality now, of Republicans that still support mail-in voting. And I don't know why, but part of it, I just attribute that somewhat to ignorance. Thunderstriker, you've been the #1 question asking guy today. Out of curiosity, what would be the first things you would do as president if you became president? Maybe. First of all, I'm never running, so I'll never become president. But if I was president, one of the first things I would do is do a fairly big downsizing of the federal bureaucracy. I would end a lot of agencies. I would fire a massive and large and tremendous number of bureaucrats in D.C., and I would cut off a lot of grant grifting programs that go on out there and kickback schemes. That would be one of my high priorities. It's not the only one, but it's certainly something that I would do as quick as I possibly could. Let's see. My husband and I did not vote. Most of my family did not vote. We were not going to mark any party. It's not anyone's business. Being an individual, thinking for themselves. Listen, you're talking about the presidential primary. Totally understand. A lot of people did the same thing. T.D. Burton, what do we do if we don't get our ballot in time? And I'm assuming you mean delivered in time, because you've got weeks before the ballots are due still. So if you haven't received it yet, you're probably okay. But if you think you should have received it, then I would make a point of talking to your auditor and finding out what the status is. It's very easy to go in and get a replacement ballot, and you can vote that replacement ballot and file it. So that part's easy. If you're late and you don't have your ballot, you've missed the August 6th deadline, there's nothing you can do. Just post it on your wall as a warning to others not to do that. Rick Wilson, what are Byrd's chances of winning over Reichert? Which really just means coming out of a scrum of 28 people and being in first position. And I think they're relatively low right now, but I would say it's no animosity on my part. I'm just saying that if you spend most of your time fighting or arguing or attacking each other, by default, you're not campaigning very well. And you also have to get outside of the comfort zone, right, that you're in. And unless you have the ability to physically get in front of 500,000 people somehow in just a few weeks, in a way that really matters, because mailers won't do it. Not even ads on TV are going to do it. You really have to have some way of impressively doing that. People don't even know who you are. So you need money to do that. Marketing is just part of it. And if you can't raise enough money to market yourself, you put yourself in an unusual situation unless you have a massive name recognition because you starred in 10 of the most popular movies in American history, right? Or you're a billionaire yourself, or some. I mean, you need something that hooks you into enough people that they know who you are. So Reichert's got money and some name recognition. Not amazing name recognition, but he has some. And Byrd's had to build that up. And Byrd did the right thing by starting early, by the way. That's a wise approach. But part of that's not just starting early, but also raising a lot of money. And the lack of funding is going to make it very difficult to get over. I would say Byrd is going to do really, really well if he gets over 15%. That'd be pretty amazing. And it would be a significant accomplishment, I think, a big one. But again, that's just my opinion at this point in time. I have seen a lot of surveys, and they generally all fall out the same way. And again, I don't totally trust surveys. I'm fully aware of how surveys can be manipulated, but it doesn't seem to matter who runs it. The results are about the same. Same reason that I think Mark Mullet's not going to go too far. And I like Mark, so somebody I like, but nobody that's going anywhere as far as that part of political process. He may have something else he can do, but not that. Thunderstriker, political question of the week, of the day, I guess. How can society strike a balance between protecting individual freedoms and ensuring collective well-being in the context of public health emergencies? Well, number one, individual freedom should be the priority right there. Now, collective well-being in the context of public health emergencies has always been a space in which the abuse of the bureaucracy is oftentimes used as an excuse to do bad things. COVID was insane. The abusive, nasty public policies that came out of that, and the acceptance of those public policies by otherwise what people that I would normally consider to be reasonably intelligent was shocking and stunning and disappointing, to say the least. But, we'll see how it goes. I saw this. Somebody had this here. Is Biden alive? Yeah, I don't know. I'm assuming he is, but he hasn't been, functioning for a long time. Anyone here voting for Kamala? I'm genuinely interested in why. Please don't vote for awful policies because you don't like another speech. Let's see. South King Fire is asking for a benefit charge like a tax, but not a tax. Is this a good thing? My answer to those is always no. When in doubt, vote no on every tax increase. So that's a pretty safe bet. Jack Pudler, if Reichert was appointed sheriff, he owes somebody a favor or two. A Democrat. Well, look back on when that was done, though. That was done in the 90s. And he had to run for re-election back then. That's not really going to be where you're going to get a lot of mileage out of that argument, I don't think. There's other arguments you can make, but not that one. Will there be a debate for governor? Historically, Donald, normally there is. I think with Ferguson, he's pretty proud of himself, so I imagine he'll want it. Let's see. Kirkland. Yeah. Well, and actually, clarity. Reichert was elected. He was appointed first, and then he was elected. So both of those things. The reason for that whole process was because in King County, what happened was the original charter had an appointed governor, or I should say, the original charter. Remember, you had a county commission structure in King County. Then King County switches to be a charter county, and one of the options under a charter county, home rule charter, you're changing the structure of local government. You're allowed to have some positions that aren't elected, including the sheriff's position. So they switched and made it an appointed position. People didn't like that, and so it went back and became an elected position. And that transition is the transition that Reichert originally spanned, where he was appointed originally and then elected. Back then, the King County Council had a lot of Republicans on it, so it was not as simple as was not as hyper partisan in the way that you think today. I just want to point that out because you can be critical of Reichert, but that's a dumb thing to be critical of him on. There's other things you could be critical of on if you want to be. Tord can't answer that. No idea what you're talking about. Let's see. Here we go. Again, if you have a question, try to answer a question. I have got a couple more minutes, and I'll try to get through whatever questions are asked. Glenn, get this. Liberals somehow think that Harris scares conservatives, which is nuts. These people are just so mentally gone. Thoughts? I don't know what they think, but remember, whatever you thought Harris was before, they're going to turn her and invent her into a new person now, if she's truly the chosen one. So that's just how it is. Let's see. Here's another question. My grandma was the one who got me into politics, drugged me to city council when I was 6, but we're on opposite ends of most things politically now. Any advice to open her eyes? I just say, your family should always come first, unless you're going to have differences in politics inside of families. Terrible thing to fight and argue about in a family, in my position. What I would say is you always love your grandma for who she is, number one. And you just ask questions sometimes, Ask her, maybe questions if she loves Seattle. Ask her why all the homeless junkies are down there, or if all those people who are dying of overdoses are a good sign of Democrat leadership and order. 24 NMC, does the militia stand a chance against the government? Well, this has always been a common question brought up in over time. Biden likes to bring this up, saying that you can't fight you can't fight a F-16, right? Something like that. Which is foolish and ignorant, of course. In a powerful, wealthy country with a lot of history and capability in it, the last thing you'd want is to have a guerrilla war of some kind, which is what you're kind of referring to in a militia setting. And remember, most of the time when you have an uprising of some kind like that, it becomes very, very difficult, regardless of whatever military you have, to push back. I mean, look at Afghanistan, look at Iraq, look at these other countries that are nowhere near the skill set or ability that you'd have here. So it's an interesting question, one that's been raised many times in the last 100 years, but certainly since the American Revolution. We have a president for the next 5 months. It's too senile to run for president. Ain't that crazy? It absolutely is. Let's see. There's two different candidates. Let's see. I have been enjoying the PDC web page. Okay, I'm glad that you have been. I posted a number of complaints there myself. What would be the best way to move back to in-person voting, and do you think it could pass? Well, you could always run an initiative. That's always quite possible. I don't think that would pass as based on survey data and analysis that I've seen. I don't think you could change it that way right now. I just don't. Happy to try it. Don't think it would necessarily work. So I think that we're going to have to grind away on some other changes. It probably isn't that dramatic a change. I think it's something you start to work towards. Remember, once Democrats lose some mail-in voting elections, they'll suddenly be happy to change it now. Did you see Obama did endorse Harris and asked for an open convention? I did, and that's a big deal. So we'll see. The PC GOP, I'm assuming Pierce County GOP is a clown show. The chair has done more to split the party in Washington state than I've ever seen. What are your thoughts on that chair breaking the 11th commandment? Listen, this comes up all the time. You got 15 counties roughly in the state of Washington who have created and invented a civil war over their cult of personality support for somebody else that they like. It's a little absurd and ridiculous to have that level of fighting, I think. But you also have a lot of new people coming into the political process, and so they take the cult of personality stuff real seriously. There's plenty of blame to go around. I don't have strong feelings about Pierce County versus any others, but I've seen this cycle many times over the last couple decades, and it is what it is. It's just, anyway, we'll see. Is that Rally a Wire Mouse? I don't know what you're talking about there. Let me see. Didn't Reichert bust the Green River Killer? Yes, that was his biggest claim to fame. Obviously, there had been an investigation of Green River murder going on for a long time. I used to run at night, right? Well, the Green River murder was actually still active. I used to run at night down around the Green River near my mom's house. That was where I did my training runs at night. It was always weird. There were always weirdos down there, and you always had to be prepared to defend yourself if you needed to. I had friends that discovered bodies that the Green River murder had left behind. If you lived in that era, that was a big deal, and catching the bad guy was an important thing. Let's see, Donald Larson. Here's a question you had right here. Can we have a referendum that would force school choice like Arizona? Yes, you can. Frankly, in our state, good chance of passing. Based on history, it would probably pass. So that's a really, really interesting option. I've seen that you posted complaints. Good job. Yes, if you look at my name as a complainant, you're going to see I've posted somewhere around about 800 or so, I think, show up on the PDC. They combined some of them. It's actually more than that, but it should give you a pretty good idea. If you go to wethegovern.com, you'll see my full list, not just of complaints, but of people who've actually been fined or have gotten in trouble because of the complaints I filed. So there have actually been consequences for them, and I list it all there. Let's see. Did you get the other Bob Fergusons on the ballot, Pam? No, I did not. Well, I did, but then they got bounced of their own volition because they didn't want to go to prison. Ferguson threatened them, and that's where that ended up. And how do we get started? Donald Larson, not sure what you're referring to, but at this point in time, this is about it, guys, because we've been going a little bit longer than I normally go. So thank you guys so much for basically joining me for the Ask Me Anything event. A lot of questions, a lot of people jumping in. We'll try to do it next Tuesday, just like we did tonight. Got a couple videos coming up. Please be there, thank and share and like. If you're not subscribed to my channel, make sure you do that right now. And please share these videos if you think they're productive or useful with others who might share an interest in Washington State or elections or activism. And looking forward to your questions next week. And as always, just have a good week. There's a lot going on. I cannot believe the craziness out there. Let me know what you think of my next two videos that I launched this week. And I'll be doing a podcast, kind of broadcast from Remnant Church in Tumwater this week. I'm not sure when they actually post it, but I'm recording it on Thursday after the Public Disclosure Commission public comment period. So hope all's well, and we'll just see how it goes. We're living in interesting times.